The iron shackles around Lillian Ashford's wrists had worn her skin raw, but it was nothing compared to the bruising weight of knowing she would never truly own herself again. Deer Lodge, Montana in the summer of 1876, was a town built on whiskey, cattle, and broken promises. The saloon where Lillian worked stood at the end of Main Street, a weathered two-story building with peeling red paint and windows that never quite let in enough light. She had arrived there 6 months ago, not by choice, but because her father's gambling debts had exceeded what any man could pay in a lifetime. When he died suddenly of a heart seizure, those debts transferred to her, the only living relation. The creditors gave her 2 options: work off the debt in service to the saloon or face prosecution for theft. They called it an indenture contract. She called it slavery with paperwork. The contract holder, a man named Vernon Grimes, owned 3 saloons across Montana territory and treated his indentured workers like livestock. Lillian served drinks, cleaned floors, and endured the wandering hands of drunk miners who thought a woman in her position had no right to refuse anything. She was 22 years old, and every day felt like drowning. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Lucas Remington walked through the saloon doors, and Lillian's life changed forever, though she did not know it yet. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of winter steel. His hat was worn but clean, his clothes practical, his boots scuffed from hard riding. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was and felt no need to prove it. When he approached the bar, Lillian noticed his hands first. They were calloused and strong, the hands of someone who worked for everything he had. "Whiskey," he said, his voice low and even, "and information." Lillian poured the drink with steady hands, though her heart hammered in her chest. She had learned to read men quickly in this place. Some were dangerous, some were harmless, and some were simply lost. This man felt different. There was a stillness about him, a controlled power that suggested he could be deadly if provoked but had no interest in proving it. "What kind of information?" she asked quietly, sliding the glass across the scarred wooden bar. "I hear Vernon Grimes holds contracts on several workers here. I want to know how much he wants for them." Lillian's breath caught. It was not unheard of for contracts to be bought and sold. Sometimes a business owner would purchase a contract to transfer the worker to a different location. Sometimes a family member would scrape together enough money to buy their loved one's freedom. But those cases were rare, and they never ended the way the indentured worker hoped. "Why do you want to know?" she asked, unable to stop herself. Lucas lifted his eyes to meet hers, and she felt the full weight of his attention. "Because I aim to buy one." "They are not cheap," Lillian said carefully. "Mr. Grimes does not let go of his assets easily." "I did not ask if it would be easy, I asked how much." Something shifted in Lillian's chest, a tiny flicker of something she had thought long extinguished. Hope was a dangerous thing in a place like this, but she could not quite kill it. "It depends on the contract," she said. "Some are worth more than others. How much debt was owed, how long they have been working, whether they have skills Grimes values." Lucas took a slow sip of his whiskey, never breaking eye contact. "What about yours?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She stepped back instinctively, her hands gripping the edge of the bar. "Mine? I have been watching you for the last 20 minutes, Lucas said calmly. "You move like someone who used to have a different life. You speak like someone with education. And you have bruises on your wrists that tell me exactly what kind of man Vernon Grimes is." Lillian's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but words would not come. In 6 months, not a single person had looked at her with anything resembling compassion. She was furniture, a thing to be used and ignored, but this stranger saw her, really saw her. "Why would you want to buy my contract?" she finally managed. "Because I can afford it, and because I do not believe anyone should be owned," Lucas said simply. "Where is Grimes?" "Upstairs in his office," Lillian whispered. "But he will not sell. I still owe nearly $2,000. My father's debts were considerable." Lucas set down his glass and straightened. "Let me worry about that." Before Lillian could respond, he turned and headed for the stairs that led to the second floor. She watched him go, her heart racing. Part of her wanted to call out, to warn him that Grimes was not a man who responded well to challenges. But another part of her, the part that had been systematically crushed over the past 6 months, desperately wanted to see what would happen. The conversation upstairs lasted nearly an hour. Lillian tried to focus on her work, serving drinks to the handful of afternoon customers, but her attention kept drifting to the ceiling above. Voices filtered down occasionally, though she could not make out words. At one point, something heavy hit the floor, and her stomach clenched with anxiety. Then, suddenly, Lucas appeared at the top of the stairs. He descended slowly, his expression unreadable. In his hand he held a folded piece of paper. He crossed the room to where Lillian stood frozen behind the bar. When he reached her, he laid the paper on the counter between them. "Your contract," he said quietly, "paid in full." Lillian stared at the document as though it might vanish if she looked away. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, unfolding it with aching slowness. There, stamped across the front in bold ink, were the words, "Debt satisfied." "Indentured dissolved." "I don't understand," she breathed. "How did you get him to agree?" "I paid him $2,500, Lucas said. "Cash." He would have held out for more, but I pointed out that you are costing him money in medical care and lost productivity due to the way he treats his workers. I also pointed out that the territorial marshal might be interested to know about his business practices. He saw reason. $2,500. It was a fortune. Lillian's entire life had been bought and paid for with the kind of money she could never hope to earn in years of honest work. "I cannot possibly repay you," she said, her voice breaking. Lucas shook his head. "I am not asking you to. The contract is dissolved. You are free." The word hit her like lightning. Free. She had not been free in so long she had forgotten what it felt like. The shackles were still on her wrists, but suddenly they felt lighter, insubstantial, as though they might fall away at any moment. "I don't even know your name," Lillian said, tears streaming down her face now, hot and unchecked. "Lucas Remington. I have a ranch about 15 miles north of here. Cattle mostly, some horses. It is a decent life if you are willing to work for it." "Why?" Lillian asked desperately. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" For the first time, something softened in Lucas's expression. He looked away briefly as though gathering his thoughts, then met her eyes again. "5 years ago, my sister found herself in a similar situation. Different circumstances, same outcome. She was indentured to a family back in Kansas, working off my father's debts after he died. By the time I found her, she had been beaten so badly she could barely walk. I bought her contract and brought her out here to Montana, but the damage was done. She died 6 months later from complications of her injuries." Lillian's hand flew to her mouth. "I am so sorry. I swore on her grave that if I ever had the means, I would help someone else in that position," Lucas continued. "I have been saving for 3 years. When I heard about the situation here in Deer Lodge, I knew what I had to do." The weight of his words settled over Lillian like a blanket. This man, this stranger, had spent years setting aside money for the sole purpose of freeing someone he had never met. The enormity of it was almost too much to comprehend. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "That is entirely up to you," Lucas said. "You are free. You can stay in Deer Lodge, leave town, do whatever you want. I will not claim any hold over you." Lillian looked around the saloon. at the scarred bar and stained floors, at Vernon Grimes watching them from the top of the stairs with barely concealed fury. She thought about the room she shared with two other indentured women, little more than a closet with a single window that looked out on an alley. She thought about the life she had lost when her father's heart gave out, and the life she had been forced into when his creditors came calling. Then she looked at Lucas Remington, at his steady gray eyes and his weathered hands and the quiet strength that seemed to emanate from him like heat from a fire. "I have nowhere to go," she said honestly. "No family, no money, no prospects." "I am not offering charity," Lucas said. "But I could use help at the ranch. My foreman's wife used to handle the cooking and household management, but they moved back east last month. If you want honest work for honest pay, the position is yours. You would have your own room, 3 meals a day, and a salary of $30 a month." $30 a month. Lillian had not seen that kind of money in her entire life. More than that, he was offering her dignity, safety, a chance to rebuild. "When do we leave?" she asked. Lucas's expression shifted, something that might have been relief flickering across his features. "Get whatever belongs to you. We ride out in 10 minutes. Lillian nodded and turned toward the back stairs that led to the workers' quarters. Her legs felt unsteady, as though she might collapse at any moment. She climbed the narrow staircase, pushed open the door to the tiny room she shared, and gathered her few possessions. A spare dress, a hairbrush that had belonged to her mother, a small Bible with her grandmother's name inscribed on the inside cover. Everything she owned in the world fit into a canvas bag small enough to carry in one hand. She paused at the window, looking out at the alley below. How many times had she stood in this exact spot, wondering if she would die here, forgotten and alone? How many nights had she cried herself to sleep, praying for a miracle she did not believe would come? The miracle had a name now: Lucas Remington. When she returned downstairs, Lucas was waiting by the door. He had 2 horses tethered outside, both strong-looking animals with good lines. He helped her mount the smaller of the 2, a chestnut mare with intelligent eyes, and then swung up onto his own horse, a large bay gelding. As they rode out of Deer Lodge, Lillian did not look back. Whatever lay behind her was dead and buried. Her future, uncertain as it was, stretched out ahead. The ride to Lucas's ranch took nearly 3 hours. The landscape rolled out in endless waves of golden grass, broken by stands of pine, and the occasional creek that carved silver ribbons through the earth. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. It was beautiful in a way that made Lillian's chest ache. She had forgotten that the world could be beautiful. They spoke little during the ride. Lucas seemed content with silence, and Lillian did not trust herself to say anything that would not sound absurd. "What did you say to the man who had just bought your freedom and asked for nothing in return?" As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a hill, and Lillian saw the ranch spread out below. It was larger than she had expected. A 2-story house built of timber and stone sat at the center, flanked by a large barn, several corrals, and a handful of smaller outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, hundreds of them, their brown and white hides dotting the grassland like stones scattered across a field. "It is not much," Lucas said, the first words he had spoken in over an hour. "But it is mine. Bought it 4 years ago with money I saved from working trail drives, built most of the house myself. It is beautiful," Lillian said softly. Lucas glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Come on, I will show you around." They rode down to the house and Lucas helped her dismount. Her legs were unsteady after the long ride and she stumbled slightly. His hand caught her elbow, steadying her, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could smell the scent of leather and sage that clung to him. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded and stepped back, leading the horses toward the barn. Lillian followed, taking in every detail. The ranch had a lived-in quality, practical rather than fancy, but everything was well maintained. The fences were sturdy, the buildings square and solid. It spoke of a man who took pride in his work. Inside the barn, Lucas unsaddled the horses and showed Lillian where the feed was kept. "I have 2 ranch hands who help with the cattle," he explained. "Brothers Tom and Charlie Hayes, good men. They live in the bunkhouse over there." He gestured toward a low building on the far side of the property. "They keep to themselves mostly, but they will help if you need anything." Lillian nodded, trying to absorb all the information. Her head felt foggy, as though she were moving through a dream. "Come on," Lucas said gently. "I will show you the house." The interior of the house was simple but comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A sturdy wooden table sat near the window, surrounded by mismatched chairs. The furniture was handmade, rough but functional. Stairs led to the second floor, where Lucas explained there were 3 bedrooms. "You can have the room at the end of the hall," he said, leading her upstairs. "It has a good window and catches the morning light." He pushed open the door and Lillian stepped inside. The room was modest but clean, with a bed covered in a simple quilt, a small dresser, and a chair positioned near the window. After months of sleeping in a closet with 2 other women, it felt like a palace. "I will let you get settled," Lucas said from the doorway. "Come down when you are ready and I will fix something to eat." "You do not have to do that," Lillian protested. "You hired me to cook." "You have had a long day," Lucas said firmly. "Rest. We will figure out the routine starting tomorrow." He left before she could argue further. Lillian stood in the center of the room, her small bag still clutched in her hand, and felt the first real stirrings of safety she had known in half a year. Slowly, she set the bag on the dresser and crossed to the window. The view looked out over the grassland, toward the mountains in the distance. The sky was turning gold and pink as the sun sank lower, painting everything in warm light. She sank onto the edge of the bed and finally let herself cry. Not the desperate, hopeless tears she had shed in the saloon, but something deeper and more cathartic. She cried for her father, for the life she had lost, for the 6 months of degradation and fear. And she cried in relief, in gratitude, in the overwhelming realization that she had been given a second chance. When the tears finally subsided, she washed her face in the basin on the dresser and changed into her spare dress. It was worn and patched, but clean. Then she made her way downstairs. Lucas was at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. The smell of beef stew filled the kitchen, rich and savory. He glanced up when she entered. "Feeling better?" "Yes," Lillian said. "Thank you. Can I help?" "You can slice that bread on the counter," Lucas said, nodding toward a loaf wrapped in cloth. They worked in companionable silence, preparing the simple meal. When everything was ready, Lucas set 2 bowls on the table and gestured for Lillian to sit. She did, and he took the seat across from her. "I should warn you," he said as he ladled stew into her bowl. "I am not much of a cook. You will probably earn your salary just by making sure we do not starve." Lillian took a tentative bite and found the stew surprisingly good, hearty and well seasoned. "This is delicious." Lucas looked skeptical but did not argue. They ate in silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "I want to make something clear," he said, his voice serious. "You work for me, but you are not obligated to me in any other way. You have your own space, your own time. If you ever feel uncomfortable or want to leave, you can. No questions asked." Lillian set down her spoon, meeting his eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to understand that you are truly free," Lucas said. "I did not buy your contract so I could own you in a different way. I bought it so you could own yourself." The sincerity in his voice was almost painful. Lillian felt fresh tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to thank me," Lucas said. "Just build a good life. That is thanks enough." They finished the meal, and Lucas showed her where everything was kept in the kitchen. By the time they were done cleaning up, full darkness had fallen. Lillian found herself exhausted, the emotional weight of the day catching up with her all at once. "I think I will turn in," she said. Lucas nodded. "Sleep as late as you need. There is no rush tomorrow." Lillian climbed the stairs to her room, changed into her nightgown, and slipped between the sheets. The bed was comfortable, the quilt soft and warm. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. She lay there for a long time, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. The creak of wood, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through grass. For the first time in 6 months, she fell asleep without fear. The next weeks settled into a rhythm that felt almost surreal in its normalcy. Lillian woke each morning to the sound of roosters and the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. Lucas was always up before dawn, already out checking on the cattle or mending fences or handling one of the 1,000 tasks that came with running a ranch. She would prepare breakfast, and he would return to eat before heading back out for the day. Her duties were not onerous. She cooked, cleaned, tended the small vegetable garden behind the house, and occasionally helped with lighter chores like feeding the chickens or collecting eggs. Lucas paid her at the end of each week, counting out the money with the same serious attention he gave everything else. Lillian saved every penny, tucking the bills into the back of her Bible. What surprised her most was how comfortable she felt around Lucas. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He was unfailingly respectful, never entering her room without knocking, never making inappropriate comments or gestures. When she burned a batch of biscuits, he ate them without complaint. When she accidentally left the door to the chicken coop open and lost 3 hens to a fox, he simply shrugged and said accidents happened. Slowly, Lillian began to understand what freedom truly meant. It was not just the absence of shackles or contracts. It was the ability to make choices, to laugh without permission, to move through the world without constantly calculating danger. It was waking up each morning and knowing that today would be better than yesterday. She also began to notice things about Lucas that she had missed in those first overwhelming days. The way he always removed his hat when he entered the house. The small scar on his left hand from a barbed wire accident. The fact that he read every evening before bed, a worn collection of Shakespeare plays that sat on the table beside his chair. He was a man of depth and discipline, someone who had built his life through sheer force of will. One evening, about a month after she arrived, Lillian was washing dishes when Lucas came in from his evening rounds. He hung his hat on the peg by the door and crossed to the table, but instead of sitting, he stood there awkwardly. "Is something wrong?" Lillian asked, drying her hands on her apron. "I was thinking," Lucas said slowly. "Tomorrow is Saturday. There is a dance in town. I thought you might want to go." Lillian blinked in surprise. "A dance? It is a monthly thing. The whole town turns out. Music, food, socializing. I thought you might enjoy getting out of the ranch for an evening." "Would you go?" Lillian asked hesitantly. "If you wanted company," Lucas said. "Or I could take you and pick you up later if you would rather go alone." Lillian considered. Part of her was terrified at the thought of returning to Deer Lodge, of facing people who had seen her in servitude. But another part of her, the part that was slowly remembering how to hope, wanted desperately to reclaim some semblance of normal life. "I would like to go," she said finally. "And I would appreciate the company." Something shifted in Lucas's expression, a softening that might have been relief or pleasure. "We will leave around 6 then." The next day, Lillian spent an inordinate amount of time preparing. She washed her hair, pressing out the tangles with her mother's old brush until it shone. She altered her best dress, the one she had worn the day her father died, taking in the waist where she had lost weight during her months at the saloon. When she finally came downstairs, Lucas was waiting in a clean shirt and his best trousers, his hair still damp from washing. "You look lovely," he said simply. Lillian felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you." The ride to town was pleasant, the evening air cool and fresh. When they arrived, the dance was already in full swing. The town hall had been transformed, its usually austere interior decorated with lanterns and streamers. A small group of musicians played on a makeshift stage, fiddles and guitars creating lively, infectious music. People swirled across the floor, laughing and talking, their faces bright with pleasure. Lillian hesitated at the door, suddenly overwhelmed. But Lucas's hand appeared at the small of her back, steady and reassuring. "It is all right," he said quietly. "You are with me." They entered together, and immediately several people greeted Lucas. He introduced Lillian as his housekeeper, and if anyone recognized her from the saloon, they were polite enough not to mention it. A few women welcomed her warmly, asking about the ranch and how she was settling in. Their kindness surprised her. "Would you like to dance?" Lucas asked after they had been there about half an hour. Lillian's heart jumped. "I have not danced in years. I am not sure I remember how." "Neither have I," Lucas said with a slight smile. "We will figure it out together." He led her onto the floor as the band struck up a waltz. His hand settled at her waist, and she placed her hand on his shoulder, acutely aware of the warmth of him, the solid strength beneath the fabric of his shirt. They moved somewhat awkwardly at first, finding the rhythm, adjusting to each other's pace. But after a few moments, something clicked, and they were gliding across the floor with the other couples. Lillian looked up and found Lucas watching her, his gray eyes intent. There was something in his gaze that made her breath catch, a tenderness she had not expected. For the first time, she allowed herself to really see him, not as her rescuer or employer, but as a man. A good man, handsome in a rough-hewn way, with a quiet strength that drew her like a magnet. "Thank you for this," she said softly. "Thank you for coming," Lucas replied. "I have been to a dozen of these dances and never enjoyed one until tonight." The words settled over her like a caress. They danced 2 more songs before taking a break to get refreshments. As they stood by the punch table, a woman approached. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Lucas Remington," she said warmly. "I have not seen you at one of these gatherings in months." "Good evening, Martha," Lucas said. "Lillian, this is Martha Cooper. She runs the general store." "Pleased to meet you," Lillian said. Martha's eyes twinkled. "So you are the young woman everyone has been talking about. I am glad to see you looking so well." Lillian tensed, wondering what exactly people had been saying. Martha seemed to read her expression and patted her hand gently. "Do not worry, dear. This is a small town. People talk, but most mean well. We are just glad you got away from that dreadful situation at the saloon. Vernon Grimes is a stain on this community." "Martha has been trying to get the town council to revoke Grimes's business license for years," Lucas explained. "And I will succeed eventually," Martha said firmly. "But enough about that awful man. I wanted to invite you both to Sunday dinner tomorrow. I make a roast that will make you weep with joy." Lucas glanced at Lillian, clearly leaving the decision to her. She found herself smiling. We would love to. Wonderful. Come around 2 o'clock. And Lucas, bring some of those apples from your trees. I want to make a pie. As Martha walked away, Lillian realized how much lighter she felt. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like she was part of something, a community that cared about its members. The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant blur. They danced, talked with neighbors, and ate slices of cake that one of the women had brought. When the music finally wound down near midnight, Lucas helped Lillian into her shawl, and they headed back to the horses. The ride home was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by people who did not need to fill every moment with words. When they reached the ranch, Lucas helped Lillian dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I enjoyed tonight," he said. "So did I," Lillian replied, suddenly shy. They stood there in the moonlight, the space between them charged with possibility. For a moment, Lillian thought he might kiss her, and her heart raced at the prospect. But Lucas simply smiled, stepped back, and tipped his hat. "Good night, Lillian." "Good night, Lucas." She went inside and climbed the stairs to her room, her mind spinning. Something had shifted between them tonight, some invisible barrier dissolving. She was no longer just the woman he had rescued, and he was no longer just her employer. They were becoming something else, something more, and the realization filled her with equal parts excitement and terror. Sunday dinner at Martha Cooper's house was everything she had promised. The food was delicious, the company warm and welcoming. Martha's husband, John, was a quiet man who ran the feed store, and they had 2 grown children who had moved east. They treated Lillian like a beloved niece, asking about her interests and telling stories about the early days of Deer Lodge. As summer stretched into fall, Lillian's life at the ranch became not just bearable, but joyful. She took pride in her work, experimenting with new recipes and improving the house bit by bit. She planted flowers in boxes beneath the windows, their bright colors a cheerful contrast to the weathered wood. She learned to ride properly, and Lucas gave her the chestnut mare as her own horse. "Her name is Rosie," he said. "She is yours if you want her." Lillian had thrown her arms around the mare's neck, overcome with emotion. She had not owned anything in so long, and the gift felt impossibly precious. But more than any of that, she found herself falling in love with Lucas Remington. It happened slowly, then all at once. She loved the way he always made sure she had enough firewood before a cold night. She loved how he listened when she talked about the books she borrowed from Martha, really listened, asking thoughtful questions. She loved his quiet competence, the way he could gentle a frightened horse, or mend a broken fence, or read Shakespeare with genuine appreciation. She loved the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, as though she were something precious and fragile that might disappear if he blinked. One evening in early October, a storm rolled in, bringing sheets of rain and wind that howled around the corners of the house. Lucas came in soaked to the bone, water dripping from his hat and coat. Lillian immediately grabbed towels and helped him out of his wet outer layers. "You are freezing," she scolded, feeling his ice-cold hands. "Sit by the fire. I will make coffee." "I am fine," Lucas protested, but he was shivering. "You are not fine. Sit." He obeyed, settling into the chair nearest the fireplace. Lillian stoked the fire until it blazed, then prepared strong, hot coffee. She handed him a cup and wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, fussing over him like a mother hen. "Thank you," Lucas said, wrapping his hands around the cup. Lillian sat in the chair across from him, watching the firelight play across his features. Outside, the storm raged, but inside it felt safe and warm, a cocoon against the world. "Can I ask you something?" Lillian said after a long moment. "Anything." "Why have you never married?" Lucas was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I came close once, about 6 years ago, back in Kansas. There was a woman, Sarah, who worked at the ranch where I was hired on. She was beautiful and kind, and I thought I loved her. I saved up for a ring, planned to propose. But then I found out she was seeing someone else, someone with more money and better prospects. She married him a month later." "I am sorry," Lillian said softly. Lucas shrugged. "It hurt at the time, but I realized later that I was more in love with the idea of marriage than with her specifically. After my sister died, I threw myself into building this ranch, and I suppose I convinced myself that a wife and family were not in the cards for me." "And now?" Lillian asked, her heart pounding. Lucas met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Now I think I was wrong." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lillian knew she should look away, should retreat to the safety of her room and the careful boundaries they had maintained. But she could not. She was tired of being afraid, tired of protecting herself from potential hurt. Lucas Remington had given her back her life, and now she wanted to give him her heart. "Lucas," she began, but he held up a hand. "I know what you are going to say," he said quietly. "That you feel obligated to me, that you cannot separate gratitude from genuine feeling, and maybe you are right. But Lillian, I need you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with that contract or the money I paid. I have watched you over these past months, seen you laugh and grow stronger and become yourself again. You are brave and kind and beautiful, and I am in love with you. I have been for a while now." Tears streamed down Lillian's face, but she was smiling. "You think I am confused about my own feelings, are you not?" Lillian stood and crossed to his chair, kneeling beside it so they were eye to eye. She took his hands in hers, still cold despite the fire. "I know exactly what I feel," she said firmly. "You gave me my freedom, yes, but that is not why I love you. I love you because you are good and decent and strong. I love you because you listen to me and treat me like an equal. I love you because when I am with you, I feel safe in a way I never have before. I love you, Lucas Remington, not because I owe you, but because I choose to." For a moment, he simply stared at her, as though unable to believe what he was hearing. Then, slowly, he cupped her face in his hands and leaned forward, pressing his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as though he was afraid she might pull away. But Lillian leaned into it, her hands sliding up to his shoulders, anchoring herself to him. The kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more passionate. Years of loneliness and fear melted away, replaced by warmth and desire and love so intense it was almost overwhelming. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Lucas rested his forehead against hers, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her cheek. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not because you feel you should, but because you want to. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving that I will always treasure your freedom as much as I treasure you." "Yes," Lillian said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They sat there by the fire as the storm raged outside, holding each other and making quiet plans for their future. They would marry in the spring, Lucas said, when the wildflowers bloomed and the weather was fair. They would invite the whole town and have the ceremony at the ranch. Martha would make the cake and they would dance until dawn. Lillian listened to his plans, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. 6 months ago, she had been a prisoner in all but name, convinced her life was over. Now she was engaged to a man she loved beyond measure, building a future she had never dared to dream possible. Winter arrived in earnest, blanketing the ranch in snow and testing their resources. But Lillian found she loved the season. The house became a refuge against the cold, and she and Lucas spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other, or simply talking about everything and nothing. They were learning each other in the way of couples preparing for marriage, discovering quirks and preferences, negotiating the small compromises that made a partnership work. Lucas taught her to play chess, and she discovered she had a talent for strategy. He taught her to shoot, taking her out to practice with tin cans until she could hit a target at 50 yards. She taught him to bake bread, laughing as he got flour in his hair. She taught him a few words of French that her mother had taught her, delighting in his terrible pronunciation. They also began planning the practical aspects of their marriage. Lucas insisted they draw up papers making Lillian a co-owner of the ranch. "What is mine is yours," he said firmly. "I want it legal and binding." Lillian protested, but he was immovable. They rode into town to meet with the lawyer, and Lucas had the documents drawn up making them equal partners in the property. When Lillian signed her name to the deed, she felt another layer of her past life fall away. She was not just free, she was powerful. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly at the ranch. Lucas gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts," he said. She gave him a new set of Shakespeare plays to replace his worn copies. They spent the day cooking together and reading by the fire, and Lillian thought she had never been happier. As winter gave way to early spring, wedding preparations intensified. Martha Cooper appointed herself unofficial coordinator, enlisting half the town in various tasks. The women of Deer Lodge, many of whom had become Lillian's friends, organized a sewing circle to make her wedding dress. It was a simple but elegant affair in cream-colored silk, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. The men, meanwhile, worked on preparing the ranch for the celebration. They built a large platform for dancing, erected awnings for shade, and helped Lucas construct additional seating. Tom and Charlie Hayes, the ranch hands, threw themselves into the preparations with enthusiasm, clearly delighted that their boss had found happiness. One afternoon in April, about a week before the wedding, Lillian was in the garden planting early vegetables when a rider approached. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and recognized Martha Cooper's husband, John. "Afternoon, Miss Lillian," he called as he dismounted. "Hello, John. What brings you out here?" His expression was grave. "I'm afraid I have some troubling news. Vernon Grimes is causing problems in town." Lillian's stomach clenched. She had not thought about Grimes in months, had allowed herself to believe that chapter of her life was closed. "What kind of problems?" "He has been drinking heavily and telling anyone who will listen that Lucas cheated him out of your contract. He is claiming Lucas threatened him and that the whole transaction was coerced. He has been trying to get the territorial marshal to investigate." Lillian felt cold despite the warm spring sunshine. Can he do that? The contract was legally dissolved. Technically, yes, if he can prove coercion. But from what I understand, there is no evidence of wrongdoing. Lucas paid fair value and Grimes accepted. The problem is that Grimes is making enough noise that it could become an issue. I wanted to warn you before it got worse. Lillian thanked John and immediately went to find Lucas. He was in the barn repairing a saddle, his hands steady and competent as they worked the leather. When she told him what John had said, his expression darkened. "I should have expected this," he said grimly. "Grimes is not the type to let things go." "What are we going to do?" Lillian asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. Lucas set down the saddle and took her hands. "Nothing illegal happened. I paid him more than the contract was worth, and I have the receipt to prove it. Let him rant to the marshal. It will not change anything." But Lillian could see the worry in his eyes. She knew, as he did, that even baseless accusations could cause damage, particularly in a small community. Reputations were fragile things in the Montana Territory. That evening, Lucas rode into town to speak with the marshal himself. He returned well after dark, his expression thoughtful. "The marshal is a reasonable man," Lucas reported. "I showed him the receipt and explained the situation. He said Grimes has made similar accusations before when other people have bought out contracts. The man is angry that his business model is falling apart, so he lashes out. The marshal assured me there will be no investigation." Lillian sagged with relief. "So it is over." "It should be," Lucas said. "But I think we need to be careful for a while. Grimes is unpredictable when he is drinking." Despite the reassurance, Lillian felt a shadow fall over her happiness. She tried to push it aside, to focus on the wedding and the future, but worry gnawed at her. The day before the wedding, that worry proved justified. Lillian was in the kitchen preparing food for the next day's celebration when she heard horses approach at speed. She looked out the window and saw Lucas and Tom Hayes riding in fast, their expressions urgent. Behind them, smoke rose from the direction of the southern pasture. She ran outside. "What happened?" "Fire," Lucas said tersely, already dismounting. "Started in the dry grass near the creek. We have been fighting it for an hour, but it is spreading." "How did it start?" Lillian demanded. Lucas met her eyes and she knew. "Someone set it deliberately. I found a kerosene can. Grimes. It had to be." Lillian felt rage boil up inside her, hot and fierce. That man had taken so much from her already, and now he was trying to destroy the life she had built. "What can I do?" she asked. "Stay here and keep watch on the house," Lucas said. "If the fire shifts direction, you need to be ready to evacuate the animals. Charlie is already out there with the other ranchers who came to help. We should be able to contain it, but I need to know you are safe." Lillian wanted to argue, but she could see the fear in his eyes. Fear for her, for the ranch, for everything they had built together. So she nodded. "Be careful," she said. He kissed her hard and fast, then swung back into the saddle and rode off with Tom. Lillian stood in the yard, watching the smoke rise against the spring sky, and prayed harder than she had ever prayed in her life. The next hours were agony. She could see the orange glow of the flames in the distance, could smell the acrid smoke on the wind. Neighbors rode past heading toward the fire, grim-faced men with shovels and wet blankets. Women stopped briefly to offer support and to help Lillian prepare water and food for the firefighters. Martha Cooper arrived mid-afternoon, her face smudged with ash. "The men are making progress," she reported. "They have dug a fire break and the wind is shifting. It should be contained soon." "Was anyone hurt?" Lillian asked. "A few burns, nothing serious. Lucas is directing the effort." "That man is something else, Lillian. Half the county is out there because he has helped so many of them over the years. They are not going to let him lose this ranch." Tears pricked Lillian's eyes. She had known Lucas was respected, but seeing the community rally around him drove it home in a way nothing else could. As the sun began to set, the riders finally returned. They were exhausted, filthy, their clothes singed and torn, but the fire was out. Lucas dismounted slowly, moving like a man twice his age. Lillian ran to him and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "We lost about 50 acres of grazing land and a section of fence, but the house and barn are safe. We are safe." Lillian pulled back to look at him. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes red from smoke. "Did you find out who did it?" Lucas's expression hardened. "The marshal is looking for Grimes now. Several people saw him riding in that direction earlier today. With the kerosene can as evidence, he will face arson charges." "Good," Lillian said fiercely. That night, the house filled with exhausted firefighters eating sandwiches and drinking coffee. Tom and Charlie stayed to help clean up, and several other ranchers offered to assist with rebuilding the fence. The sense of community, of people caring for their own, was overwhelming. As the last of the visitors departed and darkness settled over the ranch, Lucas and Lillian sat on the porch steps, too tired to move. Lucas had bathed and changed, but he still smelled faintly of smoke. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "Sorry for what? For bringing this into your life. If I had not bought your contract, Grimes would not be targeting you now." Lillian turned to him, taking his face in her hands. "Listen to me. That man targeted me long before you came along. He saw me as property, something to be used and discarded. You gave me the chance to fight back, to reclaim my life. Do not you dare apologize for that." Lucas closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I was terrified today. All I could think was that if the fire reached the house, you might be hurt. I cannot lose you, Lillian. Not now, not ever." "You will not lose me," she promised. "I am not going anywhere." They sat there in the darkness, holding each other, and Lillian felt something shift inside her. She had been afraid for so long, first of Grimes and his control, then of losing the happiness she had found with Lucas. But she was done being afraid. Tomorrow she would marry the man she loved, and no one, not Vernon Grimes or anyone else, would take that from her. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the sky a perfect arc of blue unmarred by clouds. Despite the previous day's drama, the celebration went forward as planned. If anything, the community's response to the fire seemed to have strengthened everyone's determination to make the day special. Lillian dressed in her wedding gown with the help of Martha and several other women, their voices filling the room with laughter and excited chatter. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the hollow-eyed, frightened girl from the saloon. In her place stood someone strong and radiant, someone ready to embrace the future. The ceremony took place in the afternoon, in the yard between the house and barn. Someone had built an arch from pine branches and wildflowers, and chairs had been arranged in neat rows. Nearly everyone from Deer Lodge attended. Over 100 people gathered to witness the union. Lucas waited at the altar in his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes fixed on Lillian as she walked toward him. Tom Hayes, serving as best man, stood beside him grinning. Martha Cooper was Lillian's matron of honor, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The local preacher, a kind man named Reverend Samuel Morris, performed the ceremony. His words were simple and heartfelt, speaking of love and partnership and the covenant of marriage. When it came time for the vows, Lucas's voice was steady and clear. "I, Lucas Remington, take you, Lillian Ashford, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to honor you, cherish you, and stand beside you in all things. I promise to always treasure your freedom as the precious gift it is, and to spend my life proving myself worthy of your love." Lillian's voice shook slightly, but her words were no less sincere. "I, Lillian Ashford, take you, Lucas Remington, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, support you, and build a life with you built on honesty and respect. You gave me back my life when I had lost all hope. Now I give you my heart, freely and completely, for the rest of our days." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed her tenderly, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Lillian felt joy rush through her like a flood, washing away the last remnants of fear and doubt. The celebration that followed was everything they had hoped for. Tables had been set up laden with food contributed by neighbors. The band played lively music, and couples swirled across the dance floor in the late afternoon sunshine. Children ran through the crowds playing tag while their parents visited and laughed. Lucas and Lillian danced the first dance, a waltz that reminded Lillian of that first dance back in the summer. But everything was different now. Then, they had been employer and employee, two people circling around an attraction they did not fully understand. Now they were husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word. As evening approached, the marshal arrived. He made his way through the crowd to where Lucas and Lillian stood greeting guests. "I apologize for intruding on your celebration," Marshal William Tucker said, removing his hat. "But I thought you would want to know that we apprehended Vernon Grimes this morning. He confessed to setting the fire. He will be tried for arson and likely spend several years in territorial prison." Lillian felt relief wash over her so intense it made her knees weak. Lucas squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Marshal," Lucas said. "We appreciate you handling this so quickly." "Grimes has been a menace to this community for too long," the Marshal said. "Several other indentured workers have come forward with complaints now that he has been arrested. The territorial governor is reviewing his business licenses. I suspect all his contracts will be dissolved by month's end." After the Marshal left, Lillian turned to Lucas. "It is really over," she said wonderingly. "It is really over," he confirmed. "We can move forward now, just focus on our life together." The celebration continued into the night, the dance floor lit by lanterns as stars appeared overhead. When the last guest finally departed near midnight, Lucas scooped Lillian into his arms and carried her over the threshold of the house, both of them laughing. He set her down gently in the front room, and suddenly the laughter faded, replaced by something deeper and more intense. Lucas cupped her face in his hands, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Hello, wife," he said softly. "Hello, husband," Lillian replied, and then they were kissing and nothing else mattered but this moment, this man, this love that had transformed both their lives. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of hard work and deep contentment. Lillian thrived in her role as Lucas's partner, taking on more responsibility in managing the ranch's finances and operations. She discovered she had a head for business, negotiating better prices with buyers and finding ways to cut costs without sacrificing quality. Lucas, for his part, seemed lighter than Lillian had ever seen him. The serious, quiet man who had bought her contract still existed, but now he laughed more, teased her gently, and showed affection with an ease that suggested he had been waiting his whole life to have someone to love. They worked together during the day and spent evenings planning for the future. Lucas wanted to expand the herd, perhaps add sheep to diversify their income. Lillian wanted to start a small dairy operation, selling butter and cheese to the growing town. They debated and compromised, combining their visions into something stronger than either could have achieved alone. In the spring of their second year together, Lillian realized she was pregnant. She told Lucas one evening after dinner, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through a series of expressions too quick to catalog before settling on pure joy. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice almost reverent. "As certain as I can be," Lillian said. "I saw the doctor in town yesterday. He confirmed it." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that made tears spring to her eyes. "We are going to have a baby," he whispered. "Lillian, we are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Lillian suffered from terrible morning sickness the first few months, and Lucas hovered anxiously, insisting she rest more than she wanted. But as her belly swelled and she felt the baby move for the first time, all the discomfort seemed worth it. Martha Cooper organized the women of Deer Lodge to help prepare. They threw a baby shower, presenting Lillian with quilts and tiny clothes and practical advice. Tom and Charlie Hayes built a beautiful cradle from polished pine, presenting it shyly one afternoon. The entire community, it seemed, was invested in this new life. In late November, as the first snow began to fall, Lillian went into labor. It was a long, difficult process that left Lucas white-faced and terrified. Martha and the doctor were both present, guiding Lillian through each contraction with calm efficiency. Lucas held her hand the entire time, murmuring encouragement even when she cursed him for getting her into this situation. Finally, as dawn broke over the snow-covered ranch, a baby's cry filled the house. Lillian collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure as the doctor cleaned and wrapped the infant. "A boy," he announced, placing the bundle in Lillian's arms. Lillian looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and shock of dark hair, and felt love so fierce it was almost painful. Lucas leaned over them both, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered. "You are both perfect." They named him Samuel Remington, after Lucas's father. Little Samuel was a healthy, happy baby who quickly became the center of their world. Lucas proved to be a devoted father, getting up for midnight feedings without complaint and spending hours simply watching the baby sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. They added the dairy operation Lillian had wanted, and it proved profitable beyond their expectations. Lucas expanded the herd as planned, and they hired 2 more ranch hands to help manage the increased workload. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their growing family. Samuel took his first steps, said his first words, and developed a personality that was equal parts his father's quiet thoughtfulness and his mother's fierce determination. When Samuel was 3 years old, Lillian discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter, Emma, was born on a warm June evening, arriving so quickly the doctor barely made it in time. She was tiny and perfect, with Lillian's green eyes and a calm temperament that was a stark contrast to her energetic brother. The ranch house, which had once felt too large for just 2 people, now rang with the sounds of children playing and laughing. Lucas added on to the house, building additional bedrooms and a larger kitchen to accommodate their growing family. Every nail he hammered, every board he set in place, felt like a promise to the future. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Lucas and Lillian stood on the porch watching Samuel chase butterflies through the meadow while Emma napped inside. The mountains rose in the distance, eternal and unchanging, while everything else had transformed beyond recognition. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Lucas asked quietly. Lillian considered the question. She thought about the saloon, the shackles, the despair that had consumed her. She thought about the moment Lucas walked through those doors and how her life had pivoted on that single instant. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with regret. Everything I went through led me here to you, to this life. I would not change that." Lucas turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I used to think I bought your freedom that day, but the truth is, you freed me too. I was building a ranch, but not a life. You gave me purpose, love, family. Everything good in my world exists because you said yes to marrying me." "We freed each other," Lillian said softly, "and we built something beautiful together." They stood there in the fading light, husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word. From the meadow, Samuel's laughter rang out clear and pure. Inside, Emma stirred from her nap, her gentle coos filtering through the open window. The years continued to pass, marked by both challenge and triumph. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle lost to disease and fences destroyed by storms. But there were also good harvests and profitable sales, neighbors who became friends, and children who grew strong and healthy. Samuel proved to have his father's affinity for animals, spending hours in the barn learning to care for the horses and cattle. By the time he was 8, he could rope a calf and ride better than many of the adult ranch hands. Emma, meanwhile, developed a love of books and learning that reminded Lucas of his late sister. He built her a bookshelf and filled it with volumes purchased on trips to Helena, watching with pride as she worked her way through each one when Samuel was 10 and Emma 7. Lillian gave birth to their third child, another boy they named James. His arrival was unexpected but joyfully received, and he quickly proved to be the most mischievous of the 3 children, keeping his parents constantly on their toes. As the children grew, Lucas and Lillian made sure they understood their mother's story. Not the details, which were too harsh for young ears, but the essence of it. They explained that their mother had once been in a difficult situation and that their father had helped her find freedom. But Mama freed herself, Lucas always emphasized. I just opened a door. She had the courage to walk through it and build a new life. The lesson was not lost on the children. They grew up understanding the value of freedom, the importance of standing up for those who could not stand for themselves, and the transformative power of love. As Samuel approached his 16th birthday, he began talking about wanting to work the ranch full-time after finishing school. Lucas was pleased, but insisted his son complete his education first. Knowledge is as important as hard work, he said. You need both to succeed. Emma, now 13, had begun expressing interest in becoming a teacher. Lillian encouraged her, remembering her own mother's belief in the importance of education. They made plans to send Emma to the teaching college in Helena when she was old enough. James, at 6, was still figuring out his place in the world, but he showed signs of his father's thoughtfulness and his mother's determination. On a warm evening in late summer, the entire family gathered on the porch after dinner. It had become their tradition, this time together as the sun set and the air cooled. Samuel was reading aloud from a book of Western stories, doing dramatic voices that made Emma and James laugh. Lucas sat with his arm around Lillian, watching their children with an expression of contentment. "Do you remember our first evening here?" Lucas asked Lillian quietly. "You were so scared, so uncertain about everything." "I remember," Lillian said. "I remember thinking that nothing good could possibly come from such a strange situation. How wrong I was." "Not wrong," Lucas corrected gently. "Just unable to see the future. None of us can see what is coming. We can only have faith that if we make good choices and treat people with kindness, things will work out." Lillian leaned her head on his shoulder. "You taught me that. You taught me that the world could be good, that people could be trustworthy, that love was not just a word in fairy tales." From the meadow beyond the house, fireflies began to emerge, their lights winking on and off like tiny stars fallen to earth. The children exclaimed in delight, abandoning their reading to run out and chase the glowing insects. Their laughter echoed across the ranch, pure and joyful. "We built something good here," Lucas said, watching them. "We did," Lillian agreed. "We built something that will last long after we are gone. Not just the ranch, but the values we are teaching them. Kindness, courage, the importance of freedom and choice." As the years continued to roll forward, those values proved their worth time and again. Samuel grew into a capable young man who took over more and more of the ranch operations, allowing Lucas to slow down a bit as age began to catch up with him. Emma went off to teaching college as planned and returned to open a small school in Deer Lodge, carrying forward her grandmother's legacy of education. James, the surprise late addition to the family, proved to have his mother's head for business. By the time he was 15, he was helping manage the ranch's financial affairs with a skill that amazed both his parents. Martha Cooper, who had been such a constant presence in their lives, passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72. Her funeral brought out the entire town, and Lucas and Lillian stood with their children, mourning the woman who had been such an important part of their journey. "She was there from the beginning," Lillian said through her tears. "She welcomed me when I had nothing, when I was nothing." "You were never nothing," Lucas said firmly. "But yes, Martha saw your worth before many others did. We will honor her memory by continuing to live the way she taught us, with generosity and kindness." They established a scholarship in Martha's name for young women pursuing education, funding it through the ranch's profits. It felt like a fitting tribute to a woman who had believed so strongly in giving people chances to better themselves. As Lucas and Lillian entered their later years, the ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management. He married a woman named Catherine from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Lucas and Lillian 3 grandchildren who brought new energy and joy to the homestead. Emma married one of her fellow teachers, a gentle man named Robert, and they had twin daughters who inherited their mother's love of learning. They built a house near the school, and Sunday dinners became raucous affairs, with 3 generations gathered around the expanded table. James took over the business side of the ranch operations completely, proving to have an instinct for investments and growth that took the family's wealth to new heights. He married later than his siblings, to a woman named Sarah who ran the town's new photography studio, and they had one son who showed early signs of artistic talent. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Lucas and Lillian renewed their vows in a ceremony held at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren attended, along with what seemed like half of Montana territory. Lillian wore a new dress for the occasion, but Lucas insisted she also wear the lace from her original wedding gown. "Because that was the day my real life began," he said simply. As they stood before Reverend Morris, older now but still officiating ceremonies, Lillian reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. From slavery to freedom, from despair to hope, from loneliness to love. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. "I would do it all again," Lucas said when they were finally alone that evening, sitting on their porch watching the grandchildren play in the yard. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, I would choose you always." "And I you," Lillian replied, taking his hand. "You gave me my freedom, but I gave you my heart freely. That makes all the difference." The ranch that Lucas had built with his own 2 hands had become a legacy, something that would continue long after they were gone. But more than that, they had built a family, a community, a life filled with love and purpose. As the sun set over the Montana mountains that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lucas and Lillian sat together in the comfortable silence of 2 people who knew each other completely. Around them, their family laughed and played, living proof that from the darkest circumstances could come the brightest light. They had started with a transaction, a contract bought and dissolved. But they had created something far more valuable, a love story that would be told and retold through generations, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the simple choice to see another person's humanity. And when, years later, they passed within months of each other, the way devoted couples sometimes do, they left behind not just property and wealth, but a legacy of kindness that transformed everyone it touched. The ranch continued under Samuel's capable management. The school thrived under Emma's guidance, and the business ventures James pursued brought prosperity to the entire region. But more than any of that, they left behind children and grandchildren who understood that freedom was precious, that love was powerful, and that one person's choice to help another could change the world in ways large and small. The house that Lucas built still stands, modified and expanded but fundamentally the same. The porch where he and Lillian spent so many evenings remains, and on summer nights, you can almost hear the echo of their conversations, the sound of children laughing, the quiet contentment of two people who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would last forever. Their graves sit side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, simple markers that bear their names and the dates of their lives. But the real monument to Lucas and Lillian Remington is not made of stone. It is made of family and love, and the countless lives they touched, directly and indirectly, through their choice to see each other not as roles to be filled or debts to be paid, but as human beings worthy of dignity, respect, and love. And that monument, unlike stone, will never fade or crumble, but will continue to grow and flourish as long as people remember that the greatest freedom is not freedom from something, but freedom to choose to love, to build a life of meaning and purpose. That is the legacy of the cowboy who bought a contract and gave complete freedom, and the woman who took that gift and transformed it into something neither of them could have imagined. A love story for the ages, played out under the big Montana sky, where freedom and love proved to be not opposing forces but two sides of the same beautiful coin.